Welcome to Manifested Publishers.
Welcome once again, my dear learner, to a history and government lesson. We are still tackling the topic European invasion of Africa and the process of colonization. And today we are going to look at the impact of the partition or the result of the partitioning of Africa. So our lesson objective for today, by the end of this lesson, my dear learner, you should be able to discuss the political impacts of the partitioning or the partition of Africa. So, my dear learner, as by the time we are going to end this lesson, I want you to be able to discuss the different political impacts of the partitioning of Africa. Remember, we said, what is partitioning of Africa? Yes, my dear learner, what did we say was partitioning of Africa, or how did we define the term partitioning of Africa? What definition did we give? We said it is the process by which European powers divided the African continent amongst themselves. So, and this happened during the Berlin Conference, as we learned in our previous lesson. Which year did the Berlin Conference happen? Very good, 1884 to 1885. And where did it happen, my dear learner? Wonderful. Yes, in Berlin, Germany. Who was the person who organized this conference? Who was the personality that organized this person? Yes, Otto von Bismarck. Very good. So when they sat down and decided, you British, you are going to be taking this place. This is where we shall be taking. The Germans, this is where we shall be occupying. The French, this is where we shall be occupying. There were different political factors or the different political impacts or results. When you talk of an impact, is a result. What followed after? What was the consequence? Right? What were the results of the partitioning or subdividing? It's, for example, you are having a cake at home, right? And then your mother decides to share it amongst your siblings. Each and every one of you is going to get a portion. What is the impact of that? So that is how we are going to look at Africa as a cake. Each European station or each European nation is able to get a part or a chunk. What are the impacts of that? So we are going to look at the political impacts. So, my dear learner, which are the political impacts? Political impacts. Number one, there was a change in system of administration. Change in system of administration. There was change in system of administration. We find that the Africans, as we have looked in our traditional societies, in your Form 2 work and then in your Form 1 work, we looked at the people of Kenya up to the 19th century. And then in Form 2, we looked at the African societies, the organization of African societies. We discovered that these societies, the African societies, had their own system of administration. How are they being led? Can you remember? How are they being led? Very good. They had kings. Other communities, they had council of elders. Very good. So, but now with the introduction of European powers, there were new forms of administration that we are going to mention later and we are going to discuss in detail in our third unit or from 3 work. We are going to be looking at that. There was direct administration. There was direct administration. There was also indirect. So when you talk of direct, it is where the European leaders directly come and take control of matters. When you talk of indirect, that is use of the African leaders that were in existence to take control. And then in others, we have the policy of assimilation. Assimilation. We also had association. This was used by the French in West Africa. Do not worry about these terms. We are going to explain further in our third unit. So the first and the most obvious political impact was there was a change of administration. The Africans were used to having African leaders, but now there has been Europeans have come, so they have to lead their own way, because remember, they are not just leading for the sake of leading. They are leading, or they are coming to occupy this area with a specific aim. They want to get the resources. They want to control these areas for their own benefit. So they had to bring in a form of leadership or a form of administration. So that is the first result, political result. There were new systems of administration. And then number 2, my dear learner, number 2, the Africans lost their independence. Loss of independence. Loss of independence. They lost their independence. The Africans used to live as they want. They made decisions on their own issues. Anything that was affecting them, they decided or charted a way forward of their own issues. But now the European powers have come. They are dictating on the Africans what they are supposed to do. They are dictating on them how they are supposed to carry out themselves, what they are supposed to do or not to do. And we are going to discuss this in much detail, how their independence was lost. How do you think the independence was lost? Number 1, they had no control over their land. The European powers wanted to get this land so that they could plant the raw materials, so that they could mine, right, the minerals. So the Africans were not allowed, or they lost independence or control of how they used their land. And then number 3, my dear learner, there was the drawing up of boundaries. Drawing of boundaries. Drawing of boundaries. Remember, we said the African communities lived, each and every one of them, on their own. But now the European powers have divided these African cake amongst themselves, or this African continent amongst themselves. That means there were new boundaries. What are these new boundaries? My dear learner, I want you to be able to refer to this. If you have your KLB textbook, you can refer to page 7 of your KLB textbook. I hope you can be able to see. I just want to have a brief, you to have what we talk about boundaries. There were new boundaries. There were new boundaries that were drawn up. This is the African continent, right? I hope you can see that, my dear learner. So the continent was divided. It was subdivided among the African, or among the European powers. Where you see the dark areas, we have the British. That is where we have lateral lines. That is the territory for the French. Where we have the lines going downwards, we have the German, right? Then we have the Italians, right? At these places we have Somaliland, we have Eritrea, we have Tunisia. That is where the Italians took place. The Portuguese, we had the Spanish, the Belgium. So the Belgian continent area that was at the center, right? And also where we also had free states like Liberia, and we also had Ethiopia that were not colonized, right? So the coming of the partitioning of Africa resulted to new boundaries everywhere. Remember, these are the places where the African communities were living, each independent of the other, right? But now they have been brought into the territories that the European powers have decided. Even to date, the countries that we are having, the boundaries that we are having as Kenya, they were drawn by the European powers. So they had to subdivide each and every one of them according to their own interest. So my dear learner, you can go and check that. And even the next page on 8, we have seen the different areas where the European powers occupied. So you can check that in your KLB book 3 to get more information and more maps of how what were the impacts of the division of the African continent. So we go on and look at what were the other political impacts or results of the colonization or the partitioning of the African continent. So there was rise of resistance. There was rise of resistance by African communities. So the communities that were living in peace, right, had to stand up and revolt or go against or resist the leadership of the European powers. An example of such resistances that we are going to look at are the people of Tanganyika, right? Tanganyika, these were different communities, right? We are going to look at them. We are also going to look at people like Samori Ture. Samori Ture, we are going to look at him. This is in West Africa, right? Even in Kenya, we had the Mau Mau, right? I'm sure you have learned about that. We have talked about the Nandi in Kenya, for example. Let me give an example that is close home, right? The Nandi, they had to rise up against the European invasion or the European division, right? And then the next point that we are going to discuss, there was division of African communities. Division of African communities. A very big impact that came when the European powers were demarcating or drawing up the boundaries. They were not considering the African people. They were considering their spheres of influence. What was of benefit to them as the European powers. So a result that came, the African communities were divided. Communities that were living together, having the same socio-political and economic organization were divided. A very good example are the Maasai. The Maasai. They were divided. We have Maasais in Tanzania. We have Maasais in Kenya. That is a very good example. You find Maasais were divided. Do you have Maasais? They are of the same origin. They are speaking the same language. They have the same practices, but they have divided. Some went to Kenya, others went to Tanzania. Another example, we have the Luo. Right? The Luo. We have the Luo in Kenya. We have the Luo in Uganda. Right? Other examples that we can talk of are the Babas, right? And my dear learner, you can go and find out how they were divided, between which countries were they divided. The Babas, and then we have the Fulani, We have the Fulani. These are in West Africa. West Africa. So my dear learner, you can go and find out in which countries were they divided. So this was an impact or a consequence of the African or for the division or the partitioning of the African continent. Communities that were living together were now separated. And communities that were previously not interacting, they had to be brought together. They were going now to live together as one community. And then there was rise of nationalism. Rise of nationalism. Rise of nationalism among Africans. Rise of nationalism among Africans. So in these states that had been created by the European powers, it made them or made the Africans now start thinking as that group or that state, as a nation. The communities that were brought together came and started to unite against the European powers. That was an impact of the division. Initially, the communities were fighting against one another. Remember, each and every one of them have their own distinct practices. For example, in Kenya, the Agikuyu were different from the Nandi. The Agikuyu were different from the Maasai, right? But now they have been brought together under the British protectorate, which Kenya was known as before the coming of, before we were known as Kenya. So now we started to think as Kenyans or coming together as the nation of Kenya. That is what we refer to as nationalism. That is number 6. So number 7, the next political impact, the traditional leaders. The traditional leaders lost their authority. The traditional leaders lost their authority. The leaders who were leading the traditional communities lost their authority. They could not be able to take control because now the European powers have come and taken control. An example we have in Kenya, Nabongo Mumia. Which community was he leading in Kenya, my dear learner? I'm sure you have learned that. Somewhere in your history, you have learned that. Which community was he leading? Very good. The Wanga. Very good. The Wanga. That is in Western Kenya, right? Another example you can talk of is Samori Ture, who lost his leadership in West Africa. And then the next impact, the Africans started excuse me, let me retake that. The African territories began to be ruled by companies. So the European powers invented a way of taking control of these African territories. They could give private companies to take control of the spheres of influence. An example of one company that was given that mandate was the Imperial British East African Company, which is known as which is commonly abbreviated as IBEA, right? The Imperial British East African Company. Another example, we have the British South African Company, which is abbreviated as British South African Company. So these are companies that were given mandate to take control of the European powers or the African territory. The private companies were given charters or permission to take care of the African colonies, something that had never been seen in Africa. So let us, my dear learner, look at our last impact. The European powers. Gained fame and prestige. The European powers gained fame and prestige. So as they took control of the African territories, they gained their own prestige and fame. The greater the territory you had, the more famous you were, the more powerful you are, because you have the might, you have the resources, the capital to take care of the continent. And then lastly, the very last point that we are going to discuss today, Africa was introduced to international politics. What do we mean by that? For example, the World War. Among the African, among the European powers, Africa took part in these European or in these world wars as a result of them being exposed by these European powers taking territory. We could not as Africans have taken part in the World War if the European powers were not taking control of our territory. How could we? Because we had no interest in the World War, but we gained interest because we were part of these European powers. So, my dear learners, as we come to the end of our lesson today, we have been looking at the political results or the political impacts of the partitioning or the subdivision of the African continent into smaller territories. So I want to give you a very small or a very brief question. Identify the political, the political results of the partitioning of the African continent. And with that, we have come to the end of our lesson today. Thank you for being so cooperative, and I hope you have a good time. I've been your teacher, Conan Gakure. Until our next lesson, bye-bye.
Thank you for choosing to study with us. For more information, you can call us on 0724 173845.